The air inside the studio lot carried the faint smell of sweat and dust. It was the kind of afternoon when most people stayed indoors, but a small crowd had gathered near one of the back lots at Golden Harvest. Word had spread quickly, the way it always did when someone decided to challenge Bruce Lee. The man standing across from him was built like a compact tank. Wide shoulders, thick forearms. His name was known in certain circles: underground fighting rings, military combat training camps, places where men tested themselves without cameras or referees. He had come to Hong Kong not as an actor or a stuntman, but as someone who believed the movies were making a mockery of real fighting. And he had a point to prove. Bruce stood near the center of the open space, his arms relaxed at his sides. He wore a simple black shirt, no shoes. His eyes moved once over the man's frame, not with aggression, but with the calm attention of someone measuring distance, weight distribution, the way the stranger held his breath. "You're just an actor," the man said. His voice was flat, not shouting, not theatrical. That made it worse. He said it like a fact. Like something everyone already knew but was too polite to say aloud. A few of the crew members shifted uncomfortably. Someone whispered something in Cantonese. No one moved to intervene. Bruce didn't respond. His expression didn't change. But those who knew him, those who had trained with him, who had seen what he could do when the cameras weren't rolling, noticed something shift behind his eyes. The MMA fighter took a step forward. "I've seen your movies. Fancy kicks, fancy sounds." He tilted his head slightly, almost amused. "But you've never fought anyone real, not once." Still, Bruce said nothing. The silence stretched, 5 seconds, 6, and then the fighter made his move. It wasn't a wild swing. It wasn't a desperate lunge. The man knew what he was doing. He closed the distance with a trained step, his lead hand already rising to set up a grappling entry. Something he had likely done 100 times before in real confrontations. But what happened next would be told and retold for decades. Not because of its violence, not because of any dramatic finishing blow, but because of how fast it was. 7 seconds. That's how long it took for Bruce Lee to make the man understand, without saying a single word, exactly who he was dealing with. The question now was not whether Bruce could fight. It was whether anyone watching would ever forget what they had just seen. The fighter's lead hand never reached its target. Bruce moved off the centerline with a shift so subtle it barely looked like movement at all. His body dropped slightly, not a retreat, not a flinch, just a small adjustment of angle that left the incoming arm grasping at empty air. And then he was inside. The first strike came from below the fighter's field of vision. A short, sharp punch to the solar plexus, delivered not with a wind-up, but with a sudden release of energy from Bruce's entire frame. Hip, shoulder, fist, all aligned in a single explosive moment. The sound it made was not dramatic, a dull thud, the kind of impact that doesn't echo but sinks. The fighter's breath left him in a single forced exhale. His forward momentum stopped as if he had walked into a wall. His eyes went wide, not with pain yet, but with confusion. His brain had not caught up with what his body already knew. Before he could reset, before he could pull his arms back into a guard, Bruce's right hand snapped upward. An open palm struck the underside of the man's chin, not with full force, but with enough precision to rattle the skull, to interrupt thought, to make the legs forget their job for just a moment. The fighter staggered one step back, then another. His hands came up instinctively, but they were slow now. The coordination between his mind and his limbs had been disrupted. He was still standing, still conscious. But he was no longer fighting. He was surviving. Bruce didn't pursue. He stood exactly where he had moved to, slightly off to the fighter's left, and watched. His hands were still open, relaxed, hanging at his sides. His breathing hadn't changed. His shirt hadn't even shifted out of place. The crowd said nothing. Someone in the back had been holding a cigarette. It had burned down to the filter without being touched. The fighter blinked. Once, twice. He tried to straighten his posture, tried to regain some dignity, but his body betrayed him. His left hand dropped slightly, hovering near his stomach where the first punch had landed. His jaw was clenched, not in anger anymore, but in the effort to stay upright. 7 seconds. That was all it had taken. From the moment he stepped forward to the moment he realized he was finished. Bruce still hadn't spoken. He didn't need to. The silence did all the talking. It said what words could never fully express, that there was a difference between knowing how to fight and understanding combat at a level most people would never reach. The fighter looked at Bruce, now with different eyes. The The arrogance was gone. The challenge was gone. What remained was something closer to recognition, the look of a man who had just discovered that the wall he thought was painted scenery was made of iron. One of the crew members finally moved. He stepped forward hesitantly, as if approaching a scene he wasn't sure had ended. "Should we call someone?" Bruce glanced at him briefly, then back at the fighter. "He's fine," Bruce said. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "He just needs a minute." The fighter said nothing. He didn't argue. He didn't protest. He simply stood there, breathing slowly, staring at the man he had come to expose, and realizing, perhaps for the first time, how badly he had miscalculated. But the story didn't end there, because what happened next, what Bruce did after the fight was already over, would reveal something far more important than his speed or his power. It would reveal who he actually was. For a long moment, no one moved. The fighter remained where he stood, one hand still pressed lightly against his midsection, his breathing shallow but steadying. His eyes stayed fixed on Bruce, not with hostility now, but with the wary stillness of an animal reassessing a threat it had badly underestimated. Bruce took a single step back, not a retreat, a release of pressure. He was giving the man space, not out of fear, but out of something closer to respect for a defeated opponent. Then he did something no one expected. He extended his hand, not as a challenge, not as a taunt. Just an open hand offered in the silence, palm slightly upward. The crew members exchanged glances. A few whispered in Cantonese. One of the assistant directors, a young man named Wei, later recalled the moment in an interview years afterward. "I thought maybe Bruce was going to say something sharp, say something to make the man feel small. That's what anyone else would have done. But he didn't. He just waited." The fighter looked at the hand. His jaw tightened. His pride was still there, wounded, bleeding, but not quite dead. For a few seconds it seemed like he might refuse, might turn and walk away, might spit on the ground and leave with whatever scraps of dignity he could gather. But something in Bruce's expression held him. There was no mockery there, no superiority, just calm acknowledgement, one man recognizing another, despite everything. Slowly, the fighter reached out. Their hands met, a firm grip, brief but real. Bruce nodded once. "You have good instincts," he said. "Your entry was correct, but you committed too early. You gave me your weight before you knew where I was." The words were not delivered as a lecture. They were offered quietly, almost privately, as if the two men were alone despite the dozen people watching. The fighter blinked. He hadn't expected analysis. He had expected humiliation, dismissal, perhaps a few cutting remarks in front of the crowd. Instead, he was being taught. "Your hands are fast," Bruce continued, "but your eyes are slow. You looked at my chest. You should have looked at my shoulders. The body lies. The shoulders tell the truth." The fighter nodded slowly. He didn't speak, but his posture had changed. The tension in his frame had softened. He was listening now, not as a challenger, but as a student. Bruce released his hand and stepped back again. He glanced at the crew members who were still frozen in place and gave a small wave. "Back to work," he said. "We have a scene to finish." Just like that, the spell broke. People began moving again. Someone picked up a clipboard. A lighting technician adjusted a reflector. The hum of activity resumed, tentative at first, then gradually returning to normal. But the fighter didn't leave. He stood at the edge of the lot, watching as Bruce walked toward the main set, watching as the man who had just dismantled him in 7 seconds returned to his work without fanfare, without boasting, without even a second glance back. The assistant director approached the fighter cautiously. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Do you need water? A chair?" The fighter shook his head slowly. His voice, when he finally spoke, was rough. "I fought in rings," he said. "I fought in alleys. I fought men who wanted to kill me." He paused, his eyes still on Bruce's back. "I've never felt anything like that." Wei didn't know what to say. He simply stood there, waiting. "It wasn't just the speed," the fighter continued. "It was... He knew exactly what I was going to do before I did it, like he was reading my mind." He fell silent. Across the lot, Bruce was already in conversation with the director, gesturing toward a piece of the set, completely absorbed in the next task. As if the confrontation had never happened. As if it had been nothing more than a brief interruption in his day. But for the fighter, something had shifted. He had come to Hong Kong to expose a fraud, to prove that the movies were lies and the man behind them was just a performer playing dress up. Instead, he had discovered something else entirely. And in the weeks that followed, He would make a decision that no one, least of all himself, had anticipated. The fighter's name was Jean LaBelle. At least, that was the name whispered among the crew in the days that followed. Others said it was someone else, a military combatives instructor passing through Hong Kong, or a judo champion looking to make a name by toppling the rising star of martial arts cinema. The truth, as it often did with Bruce Lee, had already begun to blur into legend. But the man himself, whoever he was, did not disappear after that afternoon. He returned 3 days later. This time he came alone. No entourage, no bluster. He arrived at the studio gate in the early morning, before the crew had assembled, and asked to speak with Bruce Lee. The security guard, a wary man named Tam, who had worked the lot for over a decade, recognized him immediately. He hesitated, unsure whether to call for backup or simply turn the man away. But something in the fighter's demeanor had changed. The aggression was gone. The hard set of his jaw had softened. He stood with his hands visible, his posture open, like a man arriving not for confrontation, but for something else entirely. "Wait here," Tam said. He made a phone call. A few minutes passed, then, to Tam's surprise, word came back. Let him through. Bruce was already awake, practicing alone in a small courtyard behind one of the sound stages. He moved through a series of strikes and evasions, his body flowing from one position to the next with a precision that made the movements look almost slow. Until you realized how much ground he was covering, how many angles he was attacking in the span of a single breath. The fighter stopped at the edge of the courtyard and watched. He didn't interrupt, didn't announce himself. He simply stood there, arms folded, observing. After a few minutes, Bruce finished his sequence and turned. He wasn't surprised to see the man. His expression suggested he had known someone was there the entire time. "You're early," Bruce said. The fighter nodded. "I didn't want to miss you." Bruce picked up a small towel from a bench and wiped his face. "You came back." "I had to." "Why?" The fighter was silent for a moment. He looked down at the ground, then back up at Bruce. "Because I've never been wrong before. Not like that. I've sized up hundreds of men. I know what a fighter looks like. I know what a fraud looks like." He paused. "I thought I knew which one you were." Bruce said nothing. He waited. "I was wrong," the fighter continued, "and I need to understand why." Bruce studied him for a long moment. His eyes moved over the man's frame the same way they had 3 days earlier, not with hostility, but with that same quiet attention, as if he were reading a text written in muscle and bone. Then he nodded toward the courtyard. "Take off your shoes." The fighter blinked. "What? Your shoes?" Bruce repeated. "Take them off. You can't feel the ground through those." The fighter hesitated, then slowly removed his boots. He stepped onto the smooth stone surface of the courtyard, feeling the cool surface beneath his feet. Bruce walked to the center of the space and turned to face him. "Hit me," he said. The fighter stared. "What? Hit me? Any way you want. Don't hold back. I'm not here to fight you again." "I know," Bruce said. "That's why I'm asking." The fighter stood motionless. His hands hung at his sides. Every instinct told him this was a trap, another setup, another humiliation waiting to happen. But something in Bruce's voice was different now. There was no challenge in it, no edge. Just an invitation. Slowly, the fighter raised his hands. He didn't charge this time. He moved carefully, testing the distance, watching for any shift in Bruce's posture. He feinted once to the left, then threw a quick jab toward Bruce's center line. Bruce didn't block it. He moved just slightly, and the punch passed within an inch of his chin. Close enough to feel the air, but not close enough to land. The fighter reset. Tried again. A low kick this time, aimed at Bruce's lead leg. Bruce lifted his foot and let the kick pass beneath it. He didn't counter, didn't strike back. He simply avoided. Again and again, like water parting around a stone. After a dozen attempts, the fighter stopped. He was breathing harder now, not from exertion but from frustration. "How?" he asked. "How are you doing that?" Bruce lowered his hands. "You're still looking at the wrong thing," he said. "You watch my hands, my feet. But you don't watch my center." He placed a finger against his own chest, just below the sternum. "Everything starts here. Before my hand moves, my center moves. Before my foot shifts, my weight shifts. If you watch here, you'll know what I'm going to do before I do it." The fighter stared at him. "That's what I did to you 3 days ago," Bruce continued. "I watched your center. You told me everything." For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then the fighter did something unexpected. He lowered himself to one knee, not in submission, but in the traditional posture of a student requesting instruction. "Teach me," he said. Bruce looked down at him. His expression was unreadable. The silence stretched, and then, quietly, Bruce extended his hand once more. The training began the next morning. There were no formal agreements, no contracts, no ceremonies. The fighter simply arrived before dawn, removed his shoes at the edge of the courtyard, and waited. Bruce appeared a few minutes later carrying 2 wooden poles, one short, one long, and set them against the wall without explanation. "First," Bruce said, "forget everything." The fighter frowned. "Everything. Everything you think you know about fighting. Every technique, every system, every label." Bruce turned to face him. "You came here with a full cup. You cannot pour anything new into a full cup." The words sounded like philosophy. The fighter had heard such things before, from instructors who used mysticism to disguise their lack of practical skill. But Bruce didn't speak like a philosopher. He spoke like a man describing the weather, simple, factual, beyond debate. "I've trained for 15 years, the fighter said. "Judo, wrestling, boxing. You want me to throw all that away?" "No," Bruce said. "I want you to stop letting it own you." He stepped closer. "You fought me with judo, with wrestling entries, with boxing setups. All good tools. But you were thinking about the tools instead of the target. You were performing techniques instead of solving problems." The fighter listened. "A punch is not a punch," Bruce continued. "It's an intention. A direction. A question you ask with your body. The answer depends on what the other man does. If you decide the answer before you ask the question, you will always be wrong." He picked up the shorter of the 2 wooden poles and tossed it to the fighter, who caught it instinctively. "Now," Bruce said, "hit me with that." The fighter looked at the pole in his hands. It was about the length of his forearm, solid, smooth, heavy enough to do real damage. "You're unarmed," he said. "Yes. And you want me to swing this at you?" "Yes." The fighter hesitated. 3 days ago, he would have relished this moment. He would have seen it as justice, a chance to reclaim his pride with a weapon against an empty-handed man. But something had changed. He no longer wanted to hurt Bruce Lee. He wanted to understand him. Still, he followed the instruction. He swung the pole in a controlled arc toward Bruce's shoulder. Not full force, but fast enough to test the reaction. Bruce didn't move until the last possible moment. Then his left hand rose, not to block, but to intercept. His palm met the inside of the fighter's wrist and redirected the energy sideways. The pole swung past Bruce's head by less than 2 inches. At the same instant, Bruce's right hand pressed lightly against the fighter's chest, exactly where a killing strike would have landed. "Dead," Bruce said calmly. He stepped back. The fighter reset. This time he attacked faster, aiming for Bruce's ribs with a low horizontal sweep. Again, Bruce redirected. Again, his counter touched the fighter's body before the strike could complete. "Dead." They repeated the drill a dozen times. Each time the fighter adjusted his angle, his timing, his rhythm. Each time, Bruce found the gap before it closed. After the 12th attempt, the fighter stopped. He was breathing hard now, not from fatigue, but from the effort of processing what he was experiencing. "It's not speed," he said slowly. "You're not faster than me, not by that much." Bruce smiled for the first time, a small expression, barely visible but genuine. "No," he agreed. "It's not speed." "Then what is it?" Bruce took the pole from the fighter's hands and set it against the wall. He walked to the center of the courtyard and stood motionless. "Close your eyes," he said. The fighter obeyed. "No, listen." Silence. The distant hum of the city, a bird somewhere overhead, the faint rustle of wind against cloth. "What do you hear?" Bruce asked. "Nothing specific. Background noise." "Listen deeper." The fighter concentrated. Seconds passed. Then, footsteps. Light, almost imperceptible. Approaching from the left, his eyes snapped open just as Bruce arrived at his side, close enough to touch. "You heard me," Bruce said. "Your ears knew I was coming, but your mind didn't trust them. By the time your eyes confirmed what your ears already knew, I was already here." The fighter stared at him. "This is what I mean," Bruce continued. "You have all the tools, but you've trained yourself to rely on only 1 or 2. Your eyes, your techniques. You've forgotten that your body already knows how to fight. It knew before you ever stepped into a gym. You just have to stop interrupting it." The fighter was silent for a long moment. "How long did it take you to learn this?" he finally asked. Bruce's expression shifted. Something flickered behind his eyes. A shadow of memory. "I'm still learning," he said quietly. "Every day, every fight, every breath." He turned and walked toward the bench where a pitcher of water waited. "That's enough for today. Come back tomorrow, same time." The fighter didn't move immediately. He stood in the courtyard, barefoot on the cool stone, watching Bruce pour himself a glass of water as if nothing remarkable had just occurred. And in that moment, he understood something that no amount of training had ever taught him. The man in front of him was not a master because he had reached the end of some path. He was a master because he had never stopped walking. The weeks that followed became a kind of quiet transformation. The fighter returned every morning, arriving before the sun broke over the Hong Kong skyline, and trained until the studio lot began to fill with crew members and actors preparing for the day's shoot. Bruce never treated him as a student in the traditional sense. There were no belts, no ranks, no formal progression. There was only practice, repetition, and the slow erosion of everything the fighter had once believed about combat. Some days they sparred. Other days Bruce simply talked, about timing, about distance, about the psychology of confrontation. He spoke of fighting not as a collection of techniques, but as a living conversation, a dialogue between two bodies that could only be understood in the moment it occurred. "A style is a prison," Bruce said one morning, as they sat in the courtyard after a particularly intense session. "The moment you say, 'I'm a boxer,' or 'I'm a wrestler,' you've already limited yourself. You have told the world, and more importantly, your opponent, exactly what you will do." The fighter wiped sweat from his forehead. "But every fighter has tendencies, preferences. You can't erase that?" "No," Bruce agreed. "But you can stop advertising it. You can learn to move between styles like water moving between rocks. The water doesn't announce itself, it simply finds the path." He stood and demonstrated a boxing stance that flowed into a grappling entry, then shifted into a low sweeping kick, then reset into something that resembled Wing Chun but wasn't quite. Each transition was seamless, without pause or hesitation, as if the styles were not separate things but different expressions of the same underlying principle. "This is what I'm trying to build," Bruce said. "Not a new style. The absence of style. The freedom to respond to anything with anything." The fighter watched in silence. He had spent his entire career categorizing opponents. This one is a striker, that one is a grappler, this one leads with his right. The idea of facing someone who could be all of those things and none of them was deeply unsettling. And yet he had experienced it firsthand in those 7 seconds. Bruce had been exactly what the situation required, nothing more, nothing less. As the weeks turned into months, the fighter began to change. His movements became less rigid, his responses became faster, not because his muscles had improved, but because the delay between perception and action had shortened. He was learning to trust his instincts, to let his body solve problems before his conscious mind could interfere. But the transformation was not only physical. One evening, after a long day of filming, Bruce invited the fighter to dinner at a small restaurant near the waterfront. They sat at a corner table, away from the other patrons, and ate in comfortable silence for a while. Then Bruce spoke. "Why did you really come to Hong Kong?" The fighter looked up from his bowl. The question was unexpected. They had never discussed his original motivations, not directly. "I told you," he said. "I wanted to expose you, prove that the movies were fake." "That's what you told yourself," Bruce said. "But that's not why you came." The fighter set down his chopsticks. He stared at the table for a long moment. "I was angry," he finally admitted. "I'd spent years training, real training, hard training, and no one cared. Then I saw you on screen, doing things that looked impossible. And everyone treated you like a god. I thought if I could beat you, maybe people would finally see me." Bruce nodded slowly. "You wanted recognition. I wanted to matter." The words hung in the air between them. Bruce was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "I understand that feeling," he said, "more than you know. When I first came to America, no one wanted to see a Chinese man on screen. I was told my nose was too flat, my accent was too strong. I was offered roles as villains or stereotypes. As jokes. For years I was invisible." The fighter looked at him. He had never heard Bruce speak about this before. "What changed?" he asked. Bruce smiled, but it was not a happy smile. It was the expression of a man remembering old wounds. "I stopped waiting for permission," he said. "I stopped trying to fit into the shapes other people had made for me. I decided that if no one would give me a place, I would build my own." He leaned back in his chair. "That's why the movies matter. Not because they make me famous, Because they let me show the world something it has never seen before. A Chinese man who is not a servant, not a villain, not a joke, a hero." The fighter was silent. "You came here to tear that down," Bruce said. "But you stayed because you recognized something. You saw that what I'm doing isn't about ego. It's about opening a door that has been closed for a very long time." He met the fighter's eyes. "Now the question is, what are you going to do with what you've learned?" The fighter didn't answer immediately. He thought about the years of training, the underground fights, the military contracts, the endless pursuit of validation through victory. And he thought about the man sitting across from him. A man who had been dismissed, underestimated, and rejected, and who had responded not with bitterness, but with creation. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but certain. "I want to help," he said. "I don't know how yet, but I want to be part of what you're building." Bruce studied him for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and placed his hand on the fighter's shoulder. "Good," he said. "Then we have work to do." The fighter never returned to the underground circuits. He stayed in Hong Kong for another year, working alongside Bruce as an informal training partner and occasional consultant on fight choreography. He never appeared on screen. That was never his purpose. But those who worked closely with Bruce during that period remembered him as a quiet presence at the edge of the set, a man who had arrived as a challenger and remained as something else entirely. When Bruce died in the summer of 1973, the fighter was among the first to hear the news. He did not attend the funeral. He did not speak to journalists. He simply disappeared from Hong Kong within a week, leaving no forwarding address. Years later, fragments of the story began to surface. A stuntman who had witnessed the original confrontation gave an interview in the late 1980s. A martial arts magazine published an anonymous account that matched the details too closely to be coincidence. And in the personal notes Bruce left behind, pages of philosophy training diagrams, scattered reflections, there was a single reference to the one who came to destroy and stayed to learn. No one knows for certain what happened to the fighter after he left Hong Kong. Some say he returned to the United States and opened a small gym that never advertised, training only those who found him by word of mouth. Others say he traveled through Southeast Asia, studying with masters who had no names and no schools. But one detail survived in every version of the story. Whenever anyone asked him about Bruce Lee, about the movies, the legend, the myth that had grown larger than the man, he would give the same answer. "I went to Hong Kong to prove he was a fraud," he would say. 7 seconds later, I became his student. Then he would fall silent, and his eyes would drift to somewhere far away. He didn't just teach me how to fight. He would add quietly. He taught me why it matters to keep searching, even when you think you've already found the answer. And that was all he would ever say. 7 seconds. That's how long it took to change 2 lives forever. 7 seconds to transform a challenge into a lesson, an enemy into a student, pride into humility. But perhaps the most remarkable thing wasn't the speed of Bruce's response, or the precision of his technique, or even the completeness of his victory. Perhaps the most remarkable thing was what happened after those 7 seconds ended. Because in that moment, when the fighter lay broken and humiliated, when his pride was shattered and his certainty destroyed, Bruce Lee did something that separated him from every other fighter who had ever lived. He extended his hand, not to help the man up, that would come later, but to offer something far more valuable than victory. He offered understanding, he offered respect, he offered the chance to become something greater than either of them could be alone. "You're just an actor," the fighter had said. 7 seconds later, he learned that Bruce Lee was something far more dangerous than any actor, far more powerful than any fighter. He was a teacher, and in the end, that made all the difference. The student had found his master. The master had found his purpose. And both had discovered that the greatest victories are not won through violence, but through the wisdom that transforms enemies into allies, challenges into lessons, and 7 seconds of combat into a lifetime of growth. That is the true story of the day someone called Bruce Lee, just an actor. It's not about the fight that followed. It's about the friendship that began when the fighting stopped.